Hello Math 125 friends. I just had this thought of making a short video showing how to use Excel and Mathematica to do longer calculations. This is not really for this course, but there were two thoughts I had based off of a discussion I had in office hours with a few students. One is, these in reality, when you're starting to approximate integrals, at some point you're going to use a calculator. In this course, since that's not an essential part of what we're teaching, we don't take time to explain that. So I thought I would take a little time in a supplemental video to talk about that. But the other thing is, in order to use those devices, that's when you really need notation. And so this is an opportunity for me to review the notation a little bit. So let's look at this. This is just from the homework. Remember, this first step is, no matter what the method is to compute the width. So it's 5 minus 1 over 8, which would be 4/8, which would be 0.5. Now the notation for the tick marks would be 1 plus I times 0.5. And here I means the number of steps. You can actually use it to compute the values. You start at this point, then you add a 0.5, then you add a 0.5, then you add a 0.5. I remember early in the terms, even now, students are probably like, but this is confusing, what's going on? The real value of this is when you want to step over to a computer and compute it, because that gives you a way you can type it in directly. Meaning, if you're approximating this with, say, right endpoints, with 8 subdivisions, you're going to do the width, which is 0.5, and then you're going to multiply, you're going to do all of these, but that's the sum. So this is where notation is valuable, I feel like. The sum from I equals 1 to n, which would be 8, of f of xi. But the function is this, and it would be hard to type in. So this is where it's valuable. If you go over to Mathematica or anything that can do sums, it gives you a way to type it in. Now, Mathematica doesn't like you to use the symbol I because it thinks that's the imaginary number. But all you have to do is type in the function, which is 6 cosine 2 times, and then I'll just leave a blank for a second. Oops. Divided by, darn it. Divided by. Maybe I'll put these parentheses in just to make sure it's calculating correctly. And then you need to put your tick marks. And that's where the notation is helpful, because it tells someone else the systematic approach you used, and the approach was 1 plus 0.5 times I. I'm using a K. 1 plus 0.5 times K. So in class, when we're just talking about the notation, we just talk about x sub I. But when you go to a computer, 0.5 times this. Yeah, and that's pretty close to what the value is. You can ask for more digits or whatever. So you can see that's the practical side of the notation we talked about earlier. Now, if you're doing the midpoint method or the trapezoid rule or the Simpson's rule, it's a little harder because you need to adjust for these 2's that are supposed to be in there. So that might require some finessing of the notation. You can, a low-tech solution is to use Mathematica. That means use Excel. Excel has these functions. But in order to do that, just a little bit of Excel stuff. You put in your first tick mark here. If you know Excel, you know that you can do things like plus 0.5, and then you can copy and paste that to the next cell, and it automatically does 0.5. This is the value of Excel. So talking about this might be helpful. And you can just type in your function. My function is 6 cosine, and then you say times the thing that's on its left. And then you can copy and paste that, and it does it again and again and again and again and again and again. Super valuable. So those are the values of the function. And then you could do whatever you wanted with them. So if you wanted to do the right endpoint method, you would add these up and multiply times 0.5. So you would do 0. You have to do a little equal sign. You do times, and you say, I want to add up these. Now I have a lot of experience with Excel, so this is no problem. But if you have less experience, this might not be helpful. That's that negative 2.23. So this is probably the cleanest way for like a general, if you know a bit of notation, then some device that can handle notation is great. If the notation is still bugging you, then Excel works pretty well. Then you would just need to put the values together in an appropriate way. What do I mean by that? If I was going to do the trapezoid rule, I would say I need to do this one times 1 and then these times 2. And so I might just say 2, this is equal to 2 times, well, you can do this in many different ways, and say, okay, that's 2 times that number. So this is, like I said, just a low-tech way. It takes a while to get used to doing this. And then say, all right, now I want to get this, I'll just take this number, you can copy and paste it or bring it over. So those ones are not going to be times 2. And then I want to add up those values. And it tries, I don't know what it's doing here, but you can say I want to add up these values. Boom. And then I want to do that times whatever it was, times 0.5 for the width, and then a half of that. So it's actually times 0.25. And there we go. There's our answer. I just gave away the answer. That's the trapezoid rule there. You can also just type these into a calculator. If you're doing midpoint methods, then you need the midpoint for each one. But that's kind of easy to adjust. You would say, I want this to be 1.25 and then 1.75. And I think for the midpoint method, it's just these values. So depending on your experience with Excel, you can handle that. If using Simpson's rule, though, you'd have to adjust and do this one times 4, this one times 2, this one times 4. Just a comment might be of interest to you. If you want to type it in, these other two are a little harder to type in here. You'd have to be kind of clever, like if I wanted to use. So that's more of the just sort of ways people use the notation. And I hope the point of that video was just to show you why this was helpful. This gives me a nice way to type things in. So I hope that's kind of interesting, little supplement.